I didn't decide it on a mountain or after a breakdown. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, in a quiet moment, when no one was watching. And that's what scared me most. Before we begin, please support Mindshift Stories by subscribing, liking the video, and leaving a comment. Your support helps us continue sharing meaningful stories with the world. For most of my adult life, I believed I was a good person because I was available. Available to help, to listen, to adjust, to show up. I wore that belief like a badge, even when it made me tired, especially when it made me tired. My days followed a predictable rhythm. Wake up early, scroll my phone while convincing myself I was getting ready, rush to work, answer messages on the way, arrive already mentally behind. I worked in an open office, nothing special, just rows of desks, the soft hum of computers, the smell of reheated coffee. The kind of place where everyone is busy, but no one is fully present. I was known as reliable. If someone needed a favor, they came to me. If a deadline was tight, I stayed late. If a friend needed to talk, I answered even when I was exhausted. I told myself this was maturity, responsibility, maybe even kindness. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling strangely disconnected from my own life. Not unhappy exactly, just muted. Like I was watching myself from a few steps behind, always reacting, never choosing. I remember thinking more than once, this is just how adulthood feels. You compromise, you push through, you don't make things about yourself. That belief stayed with me for years. The discomfort didn't arrive loudly. It slipped in quietly, almost politely. A sigh I didn't notice, a tight feeling in my chest I explained away. A habit of saying, "Yeah, that's fine," when it wasn't. One afternoon, a coworker asked if I could take on part of their workload. They smiled when they asked, like it was already agreed upon. I felt the familiar pause, the half second where I could say no. I didn't. I heard myself say, "Sure, I can handle it." As I spoke, something inside me went still. Not angry, not sad, just blank. I remember staring at my screen afterward, unable to focus, wondering why that tiny moment felt heavier than it should have. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. A friend wanted to meet up. I hadn't seen them in a while. I was tired, but I said yes anyway. On the drive there, traffic crawled, and I felt oddly irritated, not at the cars, but at myself. I kept thinking, why did I agree again? That question followed me more often than I liked. The strange part was that nothing was wrong. No major conflict, no dramatic betrayal. Everyone around me seemed satisfied, grateful even. And that made it harder to admit the truth. I felt invisible in my own decisions. The moment that changed everything didn't come with clarity. It came with discomfort. I was sitting at a cafe one morning before work, trying to enjoy a rare, quiet moment. I had ordered coffee and brought a book I'd been meaning to read for months. I was maybe 3 pages in when my phone lit up. Another request. Another, "Hey, quick question." I didn't open it right away. That was new. I stared at my phone on the table, feeling something unfamiliar rise up. Not urgency, not guilt. Space. A small, uncomfortable space where a choice existed. I remember thinking, if I don't answer right now, nothing bad will happen. And immediately after, another thought. Why does that feel wrong? That was the subtle mystery, not the message, but my reaction to ignoring it. I finished my coffee without responding. The world didn't end. No follow-up text, no crisis, just quiet. At work that day, the same coworker asked for help again. This time, something in me hesitated longer. I felt my heart beat a little faster. I thought about my own deadlines, my own energy, the way I'd felt lately. thin, stretched, slightly absent. "I can't today," I said. The words surprised me as much as they surprised them. There was a brief pause, not dramatic, just a moment where their expression shifted. Confusion, maybe mild disappointment. Then they nodded. "Okay, no worries." That was it. I went back to my desk, my hands slightly shaky, like I'd done something risky. But beneath the nerves was a quiet sense of alignment, like I'd stood up after sitting too long. Still, the real turning point came later that night. I was lying in bed, replaying the day, the cafe, the unanswered message, the simple no. I expected guilt to show up. It didn't. Instead, I felt something closer to grief. Not for others, but for myself. I realized how often I chose peace on the surface over honesty underneath. How often I'd equated being needed with being valued. And how deeply I'd internalized the idea that choosing myself was selfish. That was the moment. Not loud, not cinematic. Just the realization that settled in my chest and stayed there. I've been living as if my needs are optional. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The consequences weren't immediate or dramatic. They were subtle, psychological, and deeply personal. I started noticing how often I agreed to things automatically, how my default response was accommodation. I noticed the tension in my body before I said yes and the relief when I didn't. Some people adjusted easily, others didn't. A few friends reached out less. Conversations shifted. I sensed disappointment I hadn't noticed before, maybe because it was always there, just unspoken. At first, that hurt. I questioned myself. Am I changing too much? Am I becoming difficult? But something else was happening alongside the doubt. I was sleeping better, thinking more clearly, feeling more present in conversations I chose to have. The mental noise began to quiet, not because my life was easier, but because it was more honest. One interaction stands out. A close friend asked why I'd been different lately. The word landed awkwardly between us. "I'm just trying to be more aware of my limits," I said. They nodded slowly, then said, "I guess I was used to you always being available." There was no accusation in their voice, just truth. That sentence stayed with me for days. It made me realize something uncomfortable. Some relationships are built around who you are for others, not who you are for yourself. And when that shifts, the relationship has to adapt or fade. That understanding didn't make things painless, but it made them clear. The real mind shift wasn't about boundaries or confidence. It was about responsibility. I always thought choosing myself meant taking something away from others. In reality, I had been quietly abandoning myself and calling it generosity. I was teaching people how to treat me by what I tolerated, and I was surprised when they followed the lesson. Choosing myself didn't make me less empathetic. It made my empathy cleaner, less resentful, less transactional. I stopped expecting unspoken appreciation. I stopped doing things just to be liked. And slowly, I stopped feeling like I needed permission to exist fully in my own life. The hidden truth was simple, but not easy. When you don't choose yourself, someone else will always choose you for their own needs. And they won't mean harm by it. That realization softened something in me. I felt less angry at others for taking and more accountable for always giving. It wasn't about blame, it was about awareness. Now, when I say yes, it feels different, quieter, more deliberate. And when I say no, I don't rush to explain or apologize. I sit with the discomfort long enough to realize it won't destroy me. Most days, the change is invisible from the outside. Same job, same routines, same face in the mirror. But internally, everything has shifted. I no longer measure my worth by how useful I am. I measure it by how present I feel in my own decisions, by whether my actions match my inner truth, even when that truth is inconvenient. Sometimes I still slip.
Old habits don't disappear overnight. But now I notice, and noticing has changed everything. The moment I chose myself wasn't about walking away from people. It was about finally standing with myself. And I often wonder how many of us are exhausted not because we give too much, but because we've never been taught that we're allowed to choose ourselves without guilt.